Today, we're jumping into a story that was forged in fire and rebellion, one that stretches across centuries and really defines an entire continent. So how does a story like that even get started?
Well, we're asking a pretty huge question. How in the world did Latin American literature manage to create its own, totally unique identity, completely separate from its colonial past? It's this incredible mix of art, identity, and history all rolled into one.
Because here's the thing, you just can't understand the books without understanding the battles. This is a story that is completely tied up in centuries of empire, revolution, and this deep ongoing search for what it means to be, well, itself.
All right, so to find the beginning of this whole literary journey, we've got to go way back. Back to a time when the continent was living under the massive shadow of European empires. I mean, just try to wrap your head around the scale of this. For hundreds and hundreds of years, this wasn't a map of independent countries. It was a set of huge colonial territories. They were called viceroyalties, and they were all being run from an entire ocean away.
Now, this system set up a massive social divide. You had the Peninsulares, who were the top dogs, the ruling class born back in Spain, and then you had the Criollos, people with pure Spanish blood, but who were born in the Americas. And that created this deep, simmering tension, you know? The Criollos started to want their own identity, something that wasn't just a copy of Europe.
And that tension, it eventually just exploded. As these places fought for and finally won their independence, this giant question mark just hung in the air. What does it actually mean to be American now? Who are we if Europe isn't telling us who to be?
And that one question? Man, it kicked off one of the most powerful and fiery debates in the continent's history. It was a debate that would pretty much define the literature for the whole 19th century.
So the whole conflict was framed like this: civilization versus barbarism. Civilization was shorthand for, the cities, European culture, all the fancy books and laws. And barbarism? Well, that was everything else. The huge, wild landscapes, the native cultures, life out in the countryside, basically the messy, unique reality of the Americas.
And right at the heart of this whole argument was one single figure, the gaucho. He was the independent, tough, often violent cowboy of the plains. So was he just a lawless bandit who needed to be tamed, as this quote kind of suggests? Or was he the symbol of a truly authentic American spirit? That question fueled so many of the era's greatest stories. But look, this search for a voice, it wasn't just happening in quiet libraries and poems. No way. It was directly connected to incredibly violent political and social revolutions that were about to change the shape of the continent all over again. You fast forward to the 20th century, and bam, two revolutions in particular sent absolute shockwaves across the region. First, the Mexican Revolution, kicking off in 1910, and then the Cuban Revolution in 1959. And these were not just political footnotes. They completely remade the cultural and artistic world.
I mean, the impact of the Mexican Revolution on literature was just immediate and so powerful. You're talking about a decade of brutal, messy war, and it gave birth to a whole new genre, the novel of the revolution. And these were often written by people who were actually there, who fought in the war, which gave their writing this raw, urgent, totally authentic feel.
So you've got all these different currents, right? The colonial hangover, that search for identity, the fire of revolution. They're all building and building until they finally come together in one single, absolutely explosive literary moment in the 1960s.
This was the Latin American boom, a generation of just unbelievably brilliant writers. We're talking giants like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Julio Cortázar, Mario Vargas Llosa, who didn't just find a Latin American voice. Oh no, they made the entire world stop what it was doing and listen.
Now, a moment like the boom doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was built on the groundwork of earlier experimental movements, these avant-garde artists from the 1920s who were already trying to mix local, indigenous ideas with modern European styles. The boom authors, they just took that fusion and blasted it into the stratosphere.
What they pioneered was a style that became their calling card, magical realism. It's this amazing blend where the fantastic, the mythical, and the straight-up real all smash into each other on the same page. This quote captures it perfectly. A banana company doesn't just show up, it arrives like a hurricane, a biblical force of nature. It was a style that felt perfect for telling the continent's wild, often unbelievable history.
This was it. This was the payoff. The moment when all that searching, all that arguing, all that fighting finally came to a head. The world was finally hearing Latin America's voice, and it was loud, it was clear, and it was completely on its own terms.
So, after this incredible journey,
right? From colonial diaries to global bestsellers. What's the big takeaway here? What do we need to remember?
Well, if there's one thing you walk away with, it should be this. Latin American literature isn't some artifact in a museum. It is a living, breathing conversation with its own history. Every new book, in its own way, is talking back to the empires, the revolutions, and the myths that came before it.
And that's the thing, right? That story is so far from over, which kind of leaves us with one last thought to chew on. As the continent keeps changing and facing new challenges, what new voices, what completely new styles are going to rise up to tell the stories of tomorrow?